when we do this work very cleanly, it is quite amazing how many medical conditions clear up in the course of this without ever addressing the medical issues. Or sometimes it happens, we clean up a trauma, and now the homeopathy or the acupuncture that never worked before is now working. That's one aspect of the work I feel everybody should do. The second aspect is to look for unresolved conflicts that is different from trauma. For example, it is very common in a boy's life that there is some usually unconscious competition with dad about mom. Yeah? Both are competing for the attention with mom, and depending on how responsibly dad handles that, what can emerge here is what Hammer calls a territorial conflict. Both exist in the same home, the boy and the father. Both need mom's love and attention. The father only to the degree that he is not healed himself in terms of his own. If in this case the boy has to suppress his need for closeness to mom out of fear of being reprimanded by dad, this territorial conflict, as we call it, will typically lead in the boy later on in life, when he is 40, 50 or 60 years old, to prostate cancer. And so the second part of my work is recognizing patterns in families, usually originating in unsolvable conflict situations. And the pattern recognition and cracking those patterns is a great joy to do that in the office. With every pattern of unhealthy internal dysfunction that we can resolve, there's usually a number of medical symptoms that simply fall away from the patient. So this is the second aspect of the work that I strongly recommend and do in the office. Now the third and last part that I feel is an absolute necessity is the systemic family work. In science and psychology, it is known that conflicts and traumata that happened several generations ago that were not solved live on in the field of the patient, of the today's person. So this would be like the grandchild or the great-grandchild. And unresolved traumata will usually express themselves in our field as events and circumstances in our lives that appear as karmic or as fateful, that we have no control over, repetitive, adverse circumstances. And yet, when in therapy we manage to go back several generations and bring some healing to the original trauma, suddenly the adverse circumstances in life disappear. And this is a great joy both for the therapist and for the client. And the work that we use for this is the family constellation work. This has been created by Bert Hellinger, who's a German psychoanalyst, poet, and healer. It is very, very powerful and very simple healing work. A little bit about the tools that I recommend to use. So, number one, for the trauma therapy, I developed a technique that is generally referred to as mental field therapy. The origin, the source of this are many other types of treatment. I worked with Milton Erickson in the later part of his life, and one of my great mentors was David Cheek, one of the major co-authors and friends of Milton Erickson, who developed a method by using finger signals. The patient is in a semi-conscious state and learns from the subconscious to allow his body to give physical signals by lifting a finger for yes and one for no, that allows the therapist to engage in a dialogue with the subconscious where the content is brought to light that is lost otherwise to the conscious mind, and often the place, the arena where the healing needs to happen. I translated that technique into a muscle testing kinesiology-based technique that again had many influences. One of my major teachers in that work was Scott Walker, a chiropractor, but there was also John Diamond, a psychiatrist, and many of the teachers within chiropractic have been wonderful mentors for me in that field. So the techniques that have emerged. For trauma technique, I use mental field therapy, which simply uses the tapping of acupuncture points, eye movements, color glasses, drawing of pictures that we let the patient do, and a few other techniques that often involve a combination of acupuncture or acupressure-based techniques and psychotherapeutic methods.